Okay. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to the Middle East Teaching and Learning Conference 2020. My name is Dr. Diksha Longani, and I'm an educational psychologist by profession. I work at the Psychology Center at the Carbone Clinic in Dubai Healthcare City, and I also work as a training specialist at the Sunshine Learning Difficulty Center in Dubai. During this presentation, which is going to last for about 25 to 30 minutes, we're going to be spending our time talking about why is it so important to set back to school priorities, what should we be looking at, and how can we promote pupil readiness for learning? How can we promote a smooth transition to go back to school? Okay. Please keep your questions and comments coming on the app. I will do my absolute best to answer all of them after the presentation. Okay, what are we going to be speaking about today? We're going to look at why is there a need to set priorities for going back to school? Why is this school year so different to the others? Where do we begin? What's the first step that you can take? Whether you're a teacher, you're an educator, or you're a school leader, we're going to be looking at the recovery curriculum. For those who don't know about it, it's a curriculum or a framework or a construct which was developed in the UK specifically for transition back to school in these times. We're going to be looking at how to build a trauma-informed classroom. And what I mean by that is how to build a classroom that feels like a safe and secure base for vulnerable pupils. We're going to look at particular framework or a construct which will be useful for you to manage those initial few days of communication with your pupils and also manage a little bit of tricky behavior that you might come across. And then we'll summarize at the end. So we're going to be looking at why, what, how sort of framework. Why do we need to talk about this? What can you actually do? And how can you implement that in practice? And I hope this is what you were hoping or looking forward to receiving from this presentation. Why set back to school priorities? It's because it's too difficult to, or in a sense, a little bit naive to think that this transition back to school, whether pupils are going back to school in person or whether home learning is going to continue, learning is not just going to pick up where it left off from. This is not going to be a traditional way of welcoming students back to school if that's what's happening in your school. Catch-up learning is simply not going to take place. You can't just go back and think, okay, we ended school in Feb or March or whenever it was for your school and just pick up where we left off. Okay? There's so much that has happened. There've been loads of different experiences that pupils have had at home. Teachers have had different experiences. I've spoken to so many teachers. Some of them adjusted really quickly to, the whole e-learning zone. Some of them were finding it tricky. Some of them were exhausted, absolutely exhausted. So if we as educators have had so many different experiences of e-learning, imagine what your pupils would have faced. Yeah. From my understanding to all the pupils that I've been able to speak to, they've had such varied experiences depending on whether someone in their family contracted the virus, whether they were really concerned about it, different financial situations, different cultural backgrounds have had different sort of outlooks to the whole thing, age, gender, whether parents were successfully able to set boundaries with the child or young person, whether parents themselves had the time and capacity to sit down with the pupils and offer them some support in e-learning. So what's happened as a result of that is you've had a set of pupils who have really thrived, who have had all sorts of positive experiences or somewhat positive experiences during these past couple of months, and they're really moving forward. And then you've got these specific set of pupils who've just focused on surviving. For them and their families, survival has been the main mode over the past couple of months. Some pupils have received a lot of nurture during this time. They've enjoyed the time with family. They've learned new skills. They've baked banana breads. They've learned a new language or whatever it is. On the other hand, unfortunately, some pupils have witnessed some sort of loss or trauma or unfortunately even abuse. at home. So what I'm trying to open up your minds to is the fact that there will be loads of different kinds of experiences that pupils have experienced. They might be they might have experienced a sense of loss during these past couple of months. Some of them would have experienced a sense of growth over these past couple of months. What I mean to say is, as a result of these varied experiences, pupils' readiness for learning will be hugely varied. Yeah, not everyone's going to start off from the same base. Someone's going to be extremely ready, super happy to come back to school, meet friends. Someone might be quite neutral. Okay, I'm not sure how this is going to work because I might not be able to get along with my peers or friends. And someone might be like, this is clearly not what I wanted at this point in time. Okay. What we need to do as educators, as school leaders, is to find a common ground to begin at, one that's respectful of all pupils' experiences, and establish do a little bit of groundwork before we sort of jump off into learning, which I know we're all really eager to do. Absolutely. We want pupils to catch up with all the skills, all the learning that they've missed, but this is not going to be possible at the beginning. Okay. Where do we begin? I know that loads of you might have heard of this very beautiful play with words, this beautiful phrase called Maslow before Bloom. For those of you who haven't, here's what it's all about. Okay, let's think about our brain. This is a very simple sort of example which I use in practice to speak to young ones, to speak to parents, to speak to educators about the two different parts of our brain. One is the primitive reptilian brain, which is responsible for survival, includes our midbrain, our brainstem, and then there's the frontal part of our brain, which is involved in all the sort of thriving bits that we do. It's involved in play, control, self-regulation, memory, positive emotions, and all of that. Okay, so think about it as the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. Okay. Those of you who haven't heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a very, very primitive theory but very useful, of human motivation. I find this extremely useful and applicable during this time. And it speaks about human motivation, right? We all want to be at the top level, which is talking about fulfillment. We all want to do activities that make us feel good. We all want to be self-confident. We want to master the activities that we do. We want to be successful in our life. Okay. But to reach there, what this theory tells us is to reach that sense of self-actualization, self-esteem, good learning, which is what we want to focus at school. Our foundation needs to be strong. And what this foundation includes is physiological needs, safety needs, love, and belonging. Okay. So let's think about it in the context of the pupils that we work with. They need to have access to the basic physiological needs, which we can somewhat assume that most of them have had. If not, that's the place that we know that we have to begin. Pupils who have had that need to have a sense of safety, security, and friendship and trust. In my understanding, in my experience, it's these two levels of safety, love, belonging, trust, attachment. This is what pupils have lost out on in the past couple of months. This is where we need to begin if we want them to reach the tip of the triangle, which is good learning, self-actualization, and self-confidence. Okay? As educators, it really depends on which context you're coming from. I'm absolutely not generalizing and saying that all schools are really focused on, okay, day one, first lesson, let's get back to math, let's get back to science. Absolutely not. But I do understand that we are quite keen on it. We want to see our pupils thrive. We do want to see them do well. Yeah, we might be very tempted to sort of jump into Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which is another very, very useful theory in education, which basically talks about the different levels of learning that pupils are involved in at different stages of a lesson. So it's all about differentiation. Where do pupils start from? They start by remembering or understanding a topic, and then they move on to applying it in practice, evaluating, analyzing, and reflecting on it. Yeah, we might be really tempted to jump onto this, but before we get there, we need to make sure that the foundation is really, really strong. Okay, so think about your own set of pupils. Think about the pupils you've said goodbye to, yeah, over this past academic year. How have their experiences been? Do you know a little bit about your new pupils? Which background are they coming from? What experiences they've had? How have they experienced lockdown? How have they experienced e-learning? Are they ready to jump into Bloom's taxonomy? Okay. More importantly, how are you feeling? Yeah. Are you tempted to go out there, create the most amazing lesson plans to, just get out there, jump into CPD training and all of that? Or do you feel like you need to be comforted? You need to meet your own colleagues after so long. You need a sense of belonging as well. And you could be anywhere on the spectrum, but just a point to think and reflect on. Okay, so where do we begin? We begin at the Maslow or Bloom stage. We find out where our pupils are at. We find out where each class of ours is going to be at. Okay, and this is where the recovery curriculum comes in place. The recovery curriculum was established or published this year, so very, very recent, by Professor Barry Carpenter and Matthew Computer, who are both professors, psychologists, principals of schools, and they've done some absolutely amazing work trying to talk about the 5 losses that pupils have experienced during lockdown, during the lack of interaction, during e-learning. In the UK, there hasn't been much of e-learning that's been taking place. It's been quite different in the Middle East and the UAE, to be specific. Okay, so losses that pupils have experienced and how those losses could be compensated for. This is all that the recovery curriculum talks about. Okay, so to be able to know where we need to focus, first we need to know what we've lost out on. Okay, quite simple. What have pupils potentially lost out on? The recovery curriculum states that they've lost out on 5 major things in addition to learning that we need to be looking at. Okay, number 1 is a loss in routine. Of course, we all know that even for us, going to school is, even if we're, working as a teacher, educator, school leader, it's a huge part of our routine. We get up at a certain point in day, we go to sleep at a certain point in day, we're so prepared, we're so on board. Okay, pupils have lost out on that. That might be impacting their sleep, how they are coping with their day, because there's a huge chunk of their day which is now being unoccupied, especially for the little ones. Yeah, not much e-learning for them. How do they cope? Parents have come and said that their children are finding it difficult to cope with e-learning. They can't pay attention to the screen for so long for educational purposes, and they become very quiet. Okay, there's been a loss of consequently, there's been a loss of structure in their lives, yeah, leading to a lack of control, lack of security. Okay, in what this means is pupils, in a sense, have experienced, and families, to be honest, all of us have experienced increased stress responses over the past few months in some way or the other. Yeah, we've all actually lost a sense of friendship, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, isn't it? Because I know we've all used Zoom or whatever software it is incessantly, but that really doesn't compensate for things like simple things like eye contact, like just seeing your children, seeing your pupils smile, just being in the presence of each other. Yeah, all the positive sort of neurotransmitters that are emitted when we meet people, when we hug people, when pupils enjoy, they play. We've lost out on all of that. Okay, and this especially has had an impact on the little ones and the teenagers, because these are the points where your brain needs this oxytocin and all of these wonderful hormones, happy hormones in your brain to grow and thrive. Okay, there's been a loss of opportunity, lost experiences, no exams for some pupils, or for some pupils who've had their GCSEs. We all know GCSEs or A-levels. Their scores have been sort of come up with a combination of what the teacher feels they should be scoring. For some pupils who've had exams, it's been online. Some pupils have lost the opportunity to graduate, whether it's from school, whether it's from university. A lost sense of opportunity in general. Yeah. Throughout the year, we prepare for the big exam, whether it's board exams, GCSEs, A-levels, whatever it is. And then they just don't happen. And students have been saying, right, so we did all of the preparation for nothing. Yeah, it's like you're building up to something and then it doesn't take place. Yeah, there's been sort of a loss of differentiation, because I know teachers have found it so tricky, quite understandably. They've done some amount of differentiation, but I think pupils with SEN have really, really struggled during this time. And lastly, just a sense of freedom that comes with all of this, freedom to have your own time, to have your own space. Think about all the vulnerable pupils, what they've lost during this time. Okay, so I hope this slide is just opening up your minds or making sense in terms of what's been lost. Okay, again, loss could lead to a sense of bereavement for pupils. It could lead to a sense of lack of attachment. It could lead to trauma. It could lead to anxiety. I'm not saying that all pupils have experienced, bereavement, trauma, anxiety, and the lot, but we just need to be mindful of the increased stress responses in pupils and how this will be displayed when they come back to school. Okay, 5 levers of recovery. Okay, so you've got 5 losses. How do we recover from them? This is where, bringing all your attention to this is what you can actually do. Okay, I've copy and pasted this picture from Carpenter's actual paper, and I'm going to talk about implementation in the next slides, but this is what they've said. Okay, 5 levers of recovery in the transition back to school during COVID times. Okay, lever 1, relationships. Relationships have been lost. Yeah, pupils don't know where they stand in relation to their peers, whom they've not seen for such a long time, in relation to teachers. Yeah, we can't imagine that things are just going to pick up where they left off. Who was a favorite teacher might not be the favorite teacher anymore. Okay, it might be a joyous return. It might not be a joyous return. A sense of community. What we need to understand is that our curriculum of teaching has now been based in the community for a long period of time. Bringing it back to whichever part of the curriculum that you're at, it's going to need a bit of time. Yeah, gaps in learning. Absolutely, there are going to be gaps in learning. We completely acknowledge that, and there's research on it. How will you address those gaps? How will the pupils and family know that those gaps are going to be addressed? Okay, transparent curriculum. Again, how are we going to heal the sense of loss? Yeah, bringing in levers 2 and 3 together. How will the community know? How will the people around the child or the pupil know that the curriculum is being addressed? Yeah, what's going to happen to exams next year? This coming year? No one really knows. Okay, I think what they're trying to say is that we need to establish a sense of transparency in whatever policies or practices we're inculcating as schools and educators. Metacognition, again, this is very cognition and learning focused. I love talking about metacognition and I often get carried away. Students have been learning in different ways. Yeah, some of them have had support, some of them have not had support, some of them have been having parents literally do the work for them. Some of them have been quite independent. So again, gaps in learning have become more profound over these past couple of months. Okay, what we need to do is just bring together, okay, acknowledge and bring together those different experiences to consider, to ask the pupils themselves, how have the experiences been? What have they learned from the past couple of months? Where are their gaps? And what do they need to be addressed? Okay, it's learning about learning. It's thinking about thinking. So crucial. Space. Space, and what we mean by space is space in the external framework. Of course, having that sense of community and identity that comes with going to school and being in that space, but also having the space to rediscover themselves and their own identity. So 5 levers of recovery as advised by Carpenter and Carpenter as part of the recovery curriculum. Okay, so I've put in some ideas here that have come from my practice, that have come from my research to consider how do you actually imbibe these 5 levers into practice. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all. I'd love to hear on comments or chat about what you think you could add in each of these 5 areas. Okay, so as part of relationships, what can you actually do? Okay, prepare for check-ins and greetings more than usual. Okay, are you going to be able to welcome your children? How are you going to welcome them? Are you going to stand outside the classroom? How is the distance going to impact all of this? Okay, initially when you start off with a lesson, or whether it's circle time or whatever it is that you're focusing on, notice strengths, notice what's changed. Yeah, reinforce holding pupils in mind. Tell them that you've thought of them over the past couple of months. Yeah, you haven't just forgotten them. Because this is a strategy that comes from attachment psychology, holding pupils in mind, letting them know that even though you were not with them, okay, you've still thought of them over the past couple of months. Even if you don't know your pupils, you might be getting a new class to teach this year. That's absolutely fine. Just let them know that you were curious to know how they were doing, how they'd coped with e-learning over the past couple of months, and you wanted to try and make things easier for them. Start off with noticing strengths. Start off with praising. This comes from growth mindset. Start off by praising efforts and persistence. Okay, you might be giving out tests at the beginning to check where they're at, what they're missing out in learning. You might be asking them questions. Praise their efforts, praise their strategies, praise their hard work, praise their problem solving at the beginning. Yeah, use language effectively. I think there's some research. Actually, there is some research showing that pupils have experienced a loss in terms of the kind of language that they've been exposed to. Because think about all the wonderful bulletin boards that exist at school. Why are they in place? All the wonderful sort of settings that the teacher creates in the classroom. It's very language rich. It's very language focused. Pupils have lost out on that over the past couple of months. Okay, so this is the time to reinforce language. This is the time to name it, to tame it, name emotions, name states, name body language, whatever it is. Use more and more of language to reinforce your relationship with your pupils. Okay, moving on to community. What can you do in terms of the larger community framework? Use back to school social stories, loads of good ones online. Just go in and type back to school stories. You could use this for vulnerable pupils. You could use this if you're a parent. You could use this if you're a teacher in a general classroom. You have videos about coming back to school, how that looks like, what new schedules are going to look like. It's just to create like a sense of belonging, I guess. I know of some teachers I've been talking to, and they've been saying that once they go back to school in September, they're going to create a back to school wall of stories. Okay. It's not about achievements, more about stories. How has lockdown been? Pupils could write, pupils could draw, pupils could show evidence. Okay, just to sort of reinforce that everyone's been through something different, and now they're back, and they're going to experience all this. Okay, provide opportunities for self-regulation. So important. I know that behavior management is a huge thing for educators. This is what we often talk about in consultations or meetings. We have to accept and acknowledge that pupils will have sort of adjusted their ways of behaving. We don't know how behavior was managed at home. We don't know how they're going to be once they respond back, when they come back to school. They might be very okay with it, or they might be having, like we spoke about, increased stress responses. This might be affecting their behavior. Okay, so having those calm down boxes, those calm down jars, a space in the classroom, more space in school just to be free, sensory rooms, all of those opportunities are really, really important during this time. And also, if you're a school leader and if you have the capacity, do consider whole school wellbeing screening. Again, not in terms of putting pupils into boxes. Okay, this pupil is suffering from anxiety or depression, but just to figure out in the next couple of weeks, once you go back to school, which pupils are those that you need to be looking out for. Okay, transparent curriculum. Again, we don't know how school's going to be, whether it's going to be e-learning and going back to school together. Some schools have the option, so I know things are going to be super different, but expect some regression. We know that pupils lose out on about 20% of learning over the summer. So they've got the summer and they've got e-learning, different experiences. Okay, show them or co-construct with them. Okay, so if you're talking about math or science or whatever topic it is, okay, ask them what they've struggled with, brainstorm with them together just to get their brains jogging. Okay, about how those gaps will be fulfilled. Start with errorless learning to build confidence. Okay, and what I mean by errorless learning or teaching is start off with something that's really easy. Okay? Don't start off with the last thing they learned about before they went out into the summer break. They're less likely to remember that. Start off with something they know that makes them feel empowered, that you know they're all going to get right, just to build their confidence. Okay, primacy effect. First thing that they do in your lesson has to be something that they all succeed at. It'll make you feel better. It'll make them feel better. Okay, consider different ways of support and independence. Are you going to give them, are you going to expect pupils to be able to attend for 15 minutes on a task? Are you going to be able to give them a little bit more support than normal? How long are you expected, how long are they expected to work for independently? Can you give them a little bit more support? Consider, okay? Scaffold teaching a little bit more than you usually do. Ask more open-ended questions. Like I said before, ask them how did they solve problems while at home, provide more choices and more control. Okay, hugely important for pupils at all stages, especially teenagers. Okay, they've been feeling quite out of control during these past couple of months. So if you want them not to be, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but just it'll be difficult for them to respond to authority in the same way. So you might be able to succeed with this sort of strategy. In terms of space, offer structure, predictability, use more visuals than normal. Okay, provide increased opportunities for play. I know this is going to be difficult considering whether all pupils are at school or not, but if you can, of course, depending on your regulations, more time for play and more opportunities for just to sort of regulate their senses. Yeah, more frequent breaks, more opportunities to go outside if possible, because this ultimately is going to influence their readiness for learning. They're not going to be able to use to sit for 3 or 4 periods or 3 or 4 hours at a go and then have a break and things like that. Okay. Another attachment theory-based framework of recovery and rebuilding. So we're almost coming to the end of the recovery curriculum, but this is something that Dr. Chris Moore, who is a very prominent psychologist in the UK again, he spoke about the 6 keys to building a safe base in the classroom. Okay, a lot of this is going to be similar to what we spoke. It really depends on which framework you're comfortable with and you want to pick up on. Okay, so 6 keys to providing a safe base. Why is he talking about the trauma-informed classroom? So I don't want you to get too taken aback by the use trauma-informed. It doesn't imply that all the kids or all the pupils in your classroom will have experienced some sort of trauma. It's just to say that acknowledging that everyone's had a different experience, and this classroom is going to be very sort of focused on attachment and belonging and recovery. Okay, so the 6 keys that he spoke about were belonging, to ensure belonging, personalized greetings, greet them a lot more often, give them more jobs and responsibilities, opportunities to be successful. Okay, number 2, predictability. So very important. Okay, visuals, countdowns, songs, rhythms, explain changes to routine and expect that changes in routine will be difficult to contend with once you go back to school. Okay, because I guess somewhere pupils are thinking about, right, we're back to school now, it's all going to be normal. Okay, organization, consistent seating arrangements, clearly labeled visual checklists again. Okay, predictably and organization sort of go hand in hand here. Regulation, so important. Talk about emotions, use your language, spend more time talking about emotions and behaviors and thoughts. Consider stories, puppets, cartoons. Give time for sensory diet, like we spoke about in the previous slide. Have a designated calm corner if you don't have it already. Or spend some more time developing that aspect of your practice. Differentiation, expect that pupils will take more time to remember things. They will be able to focus for a little less amount of time as opposed to when they were in school last year. So their working memory is going to be overloaded at this point in time with loads of things. How is it going to be? Does this teacher like me? It's a new teacher and it's classroom. It's a new way of going back to school. There's so many things going on. Okay. Relationship, again, we've spoken about this. Model social skills, promote strengths, interests, and have a sense of proximity, if you can, with your pupils. Okay, what if both these frameworks that we spoke about, the recovery curriculum or the 6 keys, they seem too much to focus on at the beginning? I completely understand and acknowledge that all educators will be having a different experience. What can you do? Okay, so if that's too difficult to focus on, too much to focus on this. Focus on the PACE. Okay, PACE is just a framework that was brought about by Dan Hughes, a psychologist, in 2004. And this is just speaking about the kind of attitude that you could maintain in terms of communication or managing behavior with pupils. Okay, you'll see that throughout these different frameworks, there's a common thread. There's a common thread of relationships. There's a common thread of belonging. They're just different ways of looking at the same sort of core. Okay, so the PACE framework talks about using playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy in your practice. Okay, so if you're stuck, if you don't know what to do, if you've got too much going on, if you feel like this school is going on a different agenda and you want to go on a different one, and what I mean by that is if your school is being very focused on learning and you as an educator feel like, okay, you need to maybe start off a little slowly, you don't necessarily need to change what's going on. You can just adopt these practices within your teaching and learning framework. Okay, playfulness, just being open, spontaneous, friendly, and positive. Okay, you're feeling that things are going to be different, so are the pupils. Okay, acceptance, accepting that pupils are going to be coming from different areas. Behavior is communication. So in the beginning, you will have to accept the behaviors for what they are and then investigate them a little bit more. Okay, curiosity, not being judgmental about how much pupils remember, what kind of experiences that they've had, going down to their level. Adult does not know best. They know best about their experiences. You can just be curious about it. Okay, and you have an active interest in their experiences. And empathizing. Yeah, so very important. I think this sort of comes from the top. All of this comes from the top. If you're feeling quite paced, okay, in terms of how the school has been, how the management has been in terms of responding to you, you're more likely to sort of offer that to your pupils. Okay, we're almost coming to the end of presentation today. So back to school priorities. Regardless of whichever framework you're focusing on, what do your priorities have to be? Or what does research say your priorities have to be? It's all about going back to the basics, okay? Highlighting instances of pupil resilience, rebuilding relationships with your colleagues, with your peers, with the pupils and their peers. It's about reigniting the flame of learning. How are they feeling about learning? Are they super motivated? Are they not motivated? Go down to where they're at and begin from there. Okay, it's about revisiting learned skills and concepts rather than jumping very quickly into new things. Okay, it's about reinforcing positive behaviors, and it's a little bit about ignoring difficult behaviors at the beginning. Okay, so Dr. Tina Ray says that resilience and recovery will be easier for pupils who have accessed a nurturing home environment in terms of resources, learning, and connection. So for the pupils who have not accessed that, they're going to find it a little bit more tricky to transition back to school. So summarizing, bringing out all the points, accept that learning will only take place once pupils' basic social emotional needs are met. Okay. Think about any one of these frameworks. I'm not asking you to take them all back to the drawing board. Whichever one resonates with you, think about how you will tailor your practice according to those, whether it's class-wise or whole school-wise. Okay, recognize that pupils will bring their own share of experiences from lockdown or e-learning, which will influence their readiness for learning. Okay, be mindful of beginnings. Beginnings are going to be super important, whether it's the beginning of the day, first time you went into school, first time you meet a teacher, first time you meet peers. Okay, plan for the beginnings. And lastly, but definitely not to undermine this. Consider your own losses and your recovery. Okay. That's that. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I've had to choose a very sort of general topic to talk about because I know that loads of different educators and leaders will hopefully be attending this talk, and it's just to sort of give something that's quite generic but easy to adapt as well. Okay, so these are a couple of videos and talks that I've done, an article that I've written that might be useful. But in addition, if you're interested or if you're particularly concerned about your pupil or about a specific area of your school that you want to work at, please do get in touch with me. I am also quite active on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for participating. I'll be more than happy to take any questions or comments